a $50 million canvas, a glass-walled room at the summit of Manhattan, suspended between the storm clouds and the city's electric constellation. Julian Croft, the tech world's most enigmatic billionaire, held a sterling silver pen, ready to sign a contract that would reclaim a piece of his fractured family soul. His phalanx of experts, his sharp-suited lawyers from Sullivan and Cromwell, a renowned art historian from Yale, and his own seasoned acquisitions team, had all given their enthusiastic assent. The wire transfer was primed, a silent digital avalanche of wealth waiting for a single click. But as the nib of the pen descended, the only person in the room who understood the catastrophic depth of the lie wasn't a pedigreed expert. It was the waitress Maya Linwood, a young woman as invisible as the polished air, tasked with pouring their $100 bottle mineral water. And she was about to shatter the cathedral-like silence, risk her entire future, and detonate a meticulously crafted fraud with 4 shocking words in a language no one in that room knew she possessed. The rain over Central Park wasn't merely falling. It was a vertical river, a furious assault against the triple-pane windows of the Apex. It was a raw, unforgiving November evening, and the bruised purple light of the New York dusk made the restaurant's opulent interior feel like a gilded cage. Inside, it was a different climate entirely, a hermetically sealed world of hushed power, where the whisper of a deal being closed was louder than a shout on the street below. The carpets were a plush ocean of charcoal gray, so dense they seemed to consume the sound of your presence. And into this world, 6 nights a week, walked Maya Linwood, feeling less like a person and more like a necessary, silent mechanism. At 24, she was a study in practiced anonymity. Her uniform, a tailored black sheath dress with a small, discreet silver pin shaped like the restaurant's spire, was severe and immaculate. Her dark hair was coiled into a tight bun at the nape of her neck, a style so disciplined it created a faint, persistent ache in her scalp, a minor discomfort in a life filled with them. She was pale, with large, observant eyes the color of dark honey, and she had mastered the art of gliding between tables, refreshing a glass, and vanishing before a guest had fully registered her existence. She was, by all measures, the ideal server for a place like the Apex, a restaurant that sold privacy as its primary delicacy. But Maya Linwood was not just a waitress. She was a conservator in training, a scholar of pigments and decay. She was the granddaughter of the late Daniel Linwood, a name that, in the small, dusty studios and niche galleries of the post-war art scene, was spoken with a gruff, knowing respect. Daniel Linwood, a painter of modest renown, but a technical master, a contemporary and one-time friend of the titans of abstract expressionism. He had never achieved their fame, but he knew their secrets. He knew how they stretched their canvases, mixed their paints, and fought their demons. Maya hadn't grown up with fairy tales, but with the pungent, intoxicating smell of turpentine and linseed oil. Her grandfather's stories were of stretching, unprimed canvas with Silas Croft on a cold Montauk morning, of arguing with Rothko over the correct preparation of rabbit skin glue. Maya's father, an accountant who saw art as a failed balance sheet, had long since distanced himself. It was just her and Daniel. Then came the illness, a slow, cruel erosion of a brilliant mind. And now this. Maya, who had a full scholarship to the Institute of Fine Arts Conservation Program, one of the best in the country, was now a year deferred, working 60 hours a week to cover the crushing costs of her grandfather's specialized memory care facility. The world of grants and academic sinecures had no patience for a grieving young woman whose hands, meant for the delicate work of in-painting, were now calloused from carrying heavy trays. So she hid. She hid at the Apex, a place so stratospherically expensive she would never encounter anyone from her former life. Her manager, a perpetually stressed man named Jean-Pierre Dubois, lived and died by the dictates of the reservation system. Linwood, he'd hissed at her during the pre-shift briefing, his voice a tight coil of anxiety. The Summit Suite, 7 o'clock. You are the dedicated server. These are not customers. You do not exist. You see nothing. You hear nothing. You anticipate everything. Is that clear? Yes, Mr. Dubois, Maya murmured, her gaze fixed on a microscopic speck of lint on his lapel. This is not a dinner, Linwood. It is a transaction. The guest is Mr. Julian Croft and his team, and a Mr. Marcus Thorne. They have reserved the entire floor. Security has done a sweep. You will be screened before you enter. Do not embarrass me. Do not embarrass the restaurant." Maya just nodded. Julian Croft. Even in her cloistered world, the name resonated. Not a flashy tech bro, but a third-generation titan, a recluse, the man who had inherited the vast, complicated legacy of the Croft family, a fortune built on railroads and steel, then exploded into the stratosphere by his father's pioneering work in microprocessors. But Julian Croft's personal obsession was said to be his grandfather, the artist Silas Croft, whose explosive, vibrant canvases had defined a generation before his life was cut tragically short. Julian was on a lifelong quest to repatriate his grandfather's works, buying them back from museums and private collections at astronomical prices. At 6:45 p.m., Maya stood outside the service entrance to the Summit Suite. A man with the build of a linebacker and the dead eyes of a Secret Service agent held up a security wand. He was American, but his earpiece crackled with coded jargon. "Package is 5 out. Floor is secure." The man whose name tag read Harris gave her a curt nod. "You know the drill. Head down. Your furniture that pours water." He pushed the door open. The suite was less a dining room and more a private sky lobby. 30-foot ceilings, a fireplace crackling with blue glass embers, and a panoramic view of the storm-lashed city. In the center of the room, a long, minimalist table of polished obsidian was set for 5. At 7:03 p.m., the guests arrived. Julian Croft was taller than Maya had expected, probably in his late 40s, with a mane of silvering dark hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and then left out in the wind. He wore a dark gray suit of such exquisite tailoring that it seemed less like clothing and more like a second skin. His eyes, a startlingly pale blue, seemed to take in everything and value nothing. With him were his lead counsel, a sharp-featured woman named Evelyn, and an older, scholarly-looking man, his chief art advisor. 5 minutes later, the other party arrived, and the energy in the room shifted. The man who entered first was Marcus Thorne. He was the human embodiment of a champagne flute, tall, sleek, effervescent, and brittle. His suit was a shade of electric blue that should have been ridiculous, but on him looked like high art. His smile was a weapon, bright and perfectly aimed. "Julian," he purred, extending a hand. "A pleasure, a true honor to facilitate this homecoming." Behind him was his expert, Dr. Alistair Finch. He was in his late 60s, with a carefully curated mane of white hair, a tweed jacket with leather elbow patches, and an air of unassailable academic authority. He carried a large, climate-controlled art transport case, placing it on a prepared easel with the reverence of a priest handling a sacred relic. Maya moved like a phantom. She poured the water. San Pellegrino for Thorne's party, Voss for Croft's, as per the detailed briefing notes. Her hands were rock steady. She served the first course, a deconstructed oyster dish that looked more like a piece of jewelry, her movements economical and silent. "Shall we proceed?" Thorne said, his voice gleaming with anticipation. Dr. Finch stepped up to the easel. He undid the latches on the case. The clicks echoed in the acoustically perfect room. He swung the door open. Inside, nestled against a bed of black, museum-grade foam, was the painting. It was a Silas Croft, but not one Maya had ever seen reproduced in a book. It was magnificent, a chaotic symphony of reds, ochres, and a blazing, furious yellow. It pulsed with energy. "Mr. Croft," Dr. Finch began, his voice a rich baritone honed by decades of lecturing. "Behold a Nevada sunfall. Painted in the winter of 1953, the last major work completed before his death. Believed lost in a studio fire for 70 years. Until now." Julian Croft leaned forward, his icy composure melting into something raw and unguarded. His advisor, the older man, put on a pair of white gloves and held up a small, powerful light pen, examining the canvas. His breathing was audible. Maya, standing by the service console, ostensibly polishing a wine glass, stole a longer look. The brushwork. It was aggressive, confident. It was pure Croft. The way he built up layers of house paint and commercial enamel, the drips and splatters that were not random, but a form of controlled chaos. It was a style she knew in her bones. It was the style her grandfather had tried to teach her, the ghost of it still in her own hands when she sketched. And as she looked, a tiny cold hairline fracture of doubt appeared in her mind. Something, something was not right. She quickly looked down, focusing on the wine glass, her own reflection a pale, distorted mask. It was nothing. It was the pressure of the room. She was just a waitress. She was just furniture. The provenance, as you know, is ironclad, Marcus Thorne interjected smoothly, gesturing for Dr. Finch to continue. Maya was trapped. Protocol dictated she remain in the room until the presentation phase was over and the main courses were called for. She was a captive audience at a lecture she felt she had spent her entire life preparing for. We traced it through a private estate sale in Zurich, Dr. Finch explained, using a slim laser pointer to highlight a corner of the canvas. The original owner was a Swiss industrialist who was one of Croft's earliest European patrons. It seems he acquired it directly from the studio just weeks before the fire. It has remained with his family, unrecorded and unseen, for 7 decades. Dr. Finch gestured to a folio on the table. Our technical analysis is exhaustive. X-ray fluorescence spectroscopy confirms the pigments are consistent with those Croft was known to use in the early 1950s. Zinc white, cadmium yellows, synthetic iron oxides, all period correct. Julian Croft's lawyer, Evelyn, made a note. The chemical analysis is confirmed, Julian. Furthermore, Dr. Finch continued, his tone swelling with importance, we analyzed a microscopic fiber from the canvas itself, Belgian linen with a specific weave pattern that matches 3 other known Crofts from the same period held at the MoMA. The dating is unimpeachable. Croft's own advisor, a man named Mr. Garrett, was still examining the surface. He murmured, the crack allure, it's consistent with 70 years of natural aging. The paint layer has contracted beautifully. Indeed, Finch said with a smug smile. It's a perfect specimen, a textbook example of mid-century material aging, a perfect timeline. Maya felt that cold fracture widen into a chasm. Perfect. Her grandfather's voice, rough and laced with the grit of cheap whiskey, echoed in her memory. They were in his cluttered studio years ago, looking at a painting he'd just finished. See that kid? He'd said, pointing to a tiny smudge near the edge. That's the truth fingerprint, the slip of the hand, the moment you get tired, the drip that goes the wrong way. The forger's curse is perfection. A liar is always trying to prove he's telling the truth, so he gets every detail just right. The real artist is just trying to get the damn thing out of his head and onto the canvas. The truth is always a little messy. She forced the memory down. She was a waitress. This was not her fight. Thorne gestured to the lawyers. And of course, the painting itself represents more than just an acquisition. Nevada Sunfall is the final, crucial piece needed to establish the complete catalog raisonné of Silas Croft's work. With this, your family's estate can finally close the book, solidifying its copyright and licensing control for the next generation. $50 million is not a price. It's the key to a legacy worth billions. The air in the room was thick with the smell of old paint, new money, and impending victory. Dr. Finch, Julian Croft finally spoke. His voice was quiet, but it silenced the room. The technique, the energy. You are certain? This was it, the question Maya was screaming in her own mind. Absolutely, Dr. Finch said without a nanosecond of hesitation. The gestural application, the layering, the sheer kinetic force, it is quintessentially Croft. Every expert who has viewed it agrees. I would stake my entire 30-year reputation on its authenticity. Perfect, quintessentially, textbook. The words pounded in Maya's head. She was refilling Mr. Garrett's water glass, her movement preternaturally slow and steady. The angle brought her closer to the painting, just for a moment, under the brilliant, focused gallery lights. Her eyes weren't just looking, they were scanning, dissecting. Her mind, an instrument honed by years of obsessive study and a deep, inherited knowledge, was fully awake now. And that's when she saw it. It wasn't the brushwork, it wasn't the color, it was the cracklure, the fine network of cracks on the paint surface. Finch had called it perfect. He was right. It was too perfect. The cracks were too uniform in their depth and distribution, following the weave of the canvas with an almost geometric precision. It looked exactly like the examples of artificially induced aging she had studied in her textbooks, the result of rapid controlled heating and cooling in a specialized oven. Real aging, real crack allure was chaotic. It was influenced by 70 years of fluctuating humidity, temperature, and barometric pressure. It was messy. It was a fingerprint. This was a rubber stamp. Her eyes darted to the edges of the canvas where the paint was thickest, and she saw the second impossibility, the way the thick impasto of the yellow paint had pulled away from the red beneath it as it dried. There were tiny, microscopic, clean edges in the depressions, a sign that the red layer had been completely, almost clinically, cured before the yellow was applied on top. But Silas Croft and her grandfather had told her this 100 times, worked wet on wet. He was an impatient, furious painter, throwing layers on top of each other before they had a chance to dry, letting them bleed and merge and fight on the canvas. He never would have waited for a layer to cure. It was a violation of his entire artistic ethos. This wasn't a Silas Croft. This was a brilliant, painstaking, and soulless copy. Marcus Thorne was sliding the final contract across the obsidian table. "If you'll just sign here and here, Julian, the wire instructions are with your counsel. We can conclude this historic evening." Julian Croft picked up the heavy silver pen. He uncapped it. The soft click seemed to roar in Maya's ears. He was going to sign. He was going to spend $50 million and anchor his entire family's legacy on a lie. Maya's heart was a frantic bird beating against her ribs. Mr. Dubois' voice, "You do not exist." Her grandfather's face in the sterile beige room of the care facility. The mountain of bills on her small kitchen table. She would be fired, blacklisted. The anonymous, fragile life she had built would shatter. These men didn't just have money, they had the kind of power that could erase a person. Croft's pen hovered over the signature line. She thought of her grandfather, of his fierce, almost religious devotion to artistic honesty. "To let a fake hang on a wall, kid," he'd slurred once, late at night, "is to let a lie into the temple. And sooner or later, all the true things start to feel fake, too." The pen tip touched the paper. "No," Maya breathed, a sound so quiet it was stolen by the humming air vents. Marcus Thorne smiled, his teeth a predatory white. "A new chapter for the Croft legacy, Julian." Maya's terror was suddenly, shockingly eclipsed by a cold, pure rage. A rage at the arrogance, the clinical perfection of the lie, the disrespect. She placed the crystal water pitcher down on the service console. The clink of glass on marble was a gunshot in the silent room. Every head turned. The ghost was suddenly, terribly visible. The silence that followed was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered all sound. 5 pairs of the most powerful eyes in New York were fixed on the waitress, a girl whose name they did not know and whose existence they had not acknowledged. Maya's face was ashen, but her eyes, for the first time that night, were blazing with a furious light that stunned them all. Marcus Thorne was the first to recover. His polished smile had vanished, replaced by a mask of incandescent fury. "What is the meaning of this? Get out! You are dismissed!" Jean-Pierre Dubois, who must have been lurking in the hallway, sensed the shift in atmospheric pressure and scurried in, his face the color of spoiled milk. "Miss Linwood, what are you doing?" "My apologies, Mr. Thorne, Mr. Croft. 1,000 apologies. She knew. She will be dealt with immediately." "Maya." Julian Croft's voice cut through Dubois' frantic babbling. He hadn't moved. The pen was still in his hand, touching the paper. He was looking at her, not with anger, but with a piercing, analytical curiosity. "You made a sound." He had heard her whispered no. Maya's entire life seemed to hang in that moment. The grim apartment, the staggering debt, the quiet desperation. It was all about to be incinerated. She took a single step forward, away from the wall, into the unforgiving light of the gallery spots. Her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles were stark white. "Don't," she said, her voice trembling but clear as a bell. "Sign it." Thorne shot to his feet. This is an outrage. Dubois, call security. I want this woman arrested for harassment. Harris, Croft's head of security, was already moving, his hand touching his earpiece. He was at Maya's side in 2 long, silent strides. Miss, you need to come with me, now. Stop. Croft held up a hand, a quiet, absolute gesture. Harris froze. Dubois stopped breathing. Thorne, mid-rant, snapped his mouth shut. Croft slowly, deliberately, placed the cap back on the pen, the click echoing the one that had started this. He set it down next to the contract. He leaned back in his chair, his pale blue eyes never leaving Maya's face. The $50 million deal, the key to a $1 billion legacy, was on hold, because the waitress had spoken. Miss Linwood, is it? Croft asked, his voice dangerously calm. Yes, sir. You have, he glanced at his lawyer, 10 seconds to articulate a reason why I shouldn't have you ejected from this building and financially ruined for the rest of your short life. Why should I not sign? The room held its collective breath. Dr. Finch was watching Maya with a look of academic disgust, as if she were a piece of mold he'd discovered on a priceless artifact. Thorne looked as if he was about to physically combust. Maya looked past them all, directly at Julian Croft. She had to make a choice. English, the language of her servitude, the language of invisibility, was insufficient for the task. She needed the language of the temple, the language of her grandfather's studio, of art history, of truth. She took a deep breath, and then she spoke. Her posture changed. The deferential, invisible waitress vanished. Her shoulders squared, her chin lifted, and the voice that emerged was not the timid murmur of Miss Linwood. It was the clear, incisive, and educated Italian of a Renaissance scholar, a dialect synonymous with the very foundations of art conservation. Questo è un insulto, non un capolavoro. The effect was like a flash grenade. Dr. Alistair Finch, the Yale historian, flinched as if he'd been slapped. His academic Italian was clearly no match for her fluent, cutting delivery. Julian Croft's eyes widened. His lawyer, Evelyn, looked utterly baffled, understanding only the sudden, violent shift in the room's power dynamic. Thorne, who clearly didn't speak a word of it, looked from Finch's shocked face to Maya's defiant one. What? What the hell did she just say? Thorne demanded. Croft ignored him. He looked at Finch, whose face had gone a blotchy, unhealthy red. Alistair, a translation, if you would. Finch swallowed, his academic pomposity crumbling. She said, this is an insult, not a masterpiece. Pandemonium. Before the last syllable had died, Marcus Thorne erupted. An insult, he roared, his voice cracking with fury. This girl, this caterer, Julian, this is a coordinated attack, a corporate espionage stunt. She's been planted here to sabotage this deal. He jabbed a trembling finger at Maya. Who are you working for? Sotheby's? Christie's? Dr. Finch, recovering a sliver of his composure, stood. She's clearly disturbed, he said, his voice clipped and venomous. A disgruntled employee with delusions of grandeur. I insist you call the police, Mr. Croft. This is libel. $50 million, Thorne was shouting now, his face a mask of crimson. My reputation, Dr. Finch's reputation. We will not be slandered by a child in a cheap dress. Harris, get her out of my sight. Dubois, she is fired. Do you hear me? Fired. I am not fired, Maya said. Her voice was low, but it sliced through Thorne's hysteria like a scalpel. She turned her attention back to Julian Croft, who had remained preternaturally still, watching her, evaluating her, his mind clearly working at a speed others couldn't fathom. Mr. Croft, she said, switching back to a precise, unwavering English. Please, ask your expert, Dr. Finch. Ask him about the crack lure. Not if it's consistent. Ask him if it's random. Croft turned his icy gaze on the art historian. Alistair? Finch was sweating now, a fine sheen on his patrician brow. He was cornered. A waitress had just challenged him on his own turf, in his own language, on a technical point he had deliberately glossed over. The crack lure is perfectly uniform, which speaks to the stable, climate-controlled conditions in which it was kept, Finch stammered, scrambling for a plausible explanation. No, Maya countered instantly. It speaks to a thermal cycling oven. It's a textbook forger's technique to simulate age. Real aging is messy. It's asymmetric, like a life. This painting hasn't lived a life. It was born old in a laboratory. This is preposterous, Finch blustered. You have no proof. My proof, Maya said, her voice gaining power, is in the paint itself. Silas Croft worked a la prima, wet on wet. His layers were a battle. They fought, they bled into one another. He was building texture, emotion, not a stratified diagram. She took a step closer to the painting, her former fear replaced by the pure, cold certainty of her expertise. May I have your light pen, Mr. Garrett? Croft's advisor, stunned into silence, simply handed it to her. Julian Croft gave a slight nod of assent. Maya, ignoring the sputtering rage of Thorne and Finch, stepped up to the masterpiece. She clicked on the powerful pen light, holding it at a sharp, raking angle to the canvas. Look, she commanded, her voice ringing with an authority that stunned everyone. Here, in the deep valleys of the yellow impasto, look at the layer beneath. The red. The edges are clean. They're sharp. This red layer was bone dry, cured before the yellow was applied. Silas Croft never waited for paint to dry. He didn't have the patience. He would have considered it a betrayal of the moment. She looked from the painting to Julian Croft. Your grandfather was at war with the canvas. This painter was just coloring inside the lines. The room was utterly silent. Croft's advisor, Mr. Garrett, leaned in, his own face a mask of dawning horror. He looked at the detail, then looked at Maya, then back at the painting. My God, he whispered. She's right. It's sterile. Dr. Finch was chalk white. He was ruined. A 24-year-old waitress had just dismantled his 30-year reputation in 30 seconds. But Maya wasn't finished. She turned from the technical details to the emotional core of the fraud. But that's not his biggest mistake. That's just a technical error. The real mistake is what's missing. She looked directly into Julian Croft's pale blue eyes. Sir, I'm sure you've read all the books about your grandfather, the academic treatises, the biographies. But did any of them ever mention what he did with the sand from Montauk Point? Croft stared at her, his expression unreadable. What are you talking about? My grandfather, Maya said, her voice softening for the first time, becoming personal, was Daniel Linwood. He stretched canvases for your grandfather in the winter of '51. They weren't famous then. They were just two broke, angry young men trying to paint the truth. And my grandfather told me a story, that every time Silas finished a painting he truly loved, one he knew was a piece of his soul, he did something. He'd take a single grain of sand from his pocket, sand from the beach at Montauk where he first felt he could be an artist, and he would press it into the final layer of varnish in the bottom right corner. A tiny, private signature, his anchor to the earth. It's not in any of the books. It was a secret between friends. With a hand that was now perfectly steady, Maya moved the light pen to the bottom right corner of the canvas. She traced the beam over the clear layer of varnish. It was pristine, flawless, empty. There is no sand, Mr. Croft, she said softly, because this isn't his soul. It's just a product. The silence that followed was the sound of a $50 million deal and a $1 billion legacy disintegrating into dust. Marcus Thorne didn't even try to argue. He saw the look on Julian Croft's face, a chilling, absolute certainty, and he panicked. He grabbed the folio of Providence papers from the table and made a desperate lunge for the door. This isn't over, he shrieked. You have no idea who you're dealing with. He never made it. Harris, Croft's head of security, moved with the fluid, brutal efficiency of a predator. Thorne met the solid oak door not with his hand, but with his face, propelled by an arm bar that nearly tore his shoulder from its socket. He crumpled to the floor in a heap of electric blue tailoring and broken pride. A second security guard materialized from the hallway, instantly cuffing Thorne's hands behind his back. Dr. Finch didn't run. He simply sagged into the nearest chair, his face a crumpled, papery mask of defeat. He looked like a man who had just watched his own obituary being written. Get him up, Croft commanded, his voice like cracking ice. Harris hauled a whimpering Thorne to his feet. A thin trickle of blood ran from his nose. a grotesque splash of crimson on his pristine white shirt. You can't do this, Thorne spat, a mixture of blood and spittle flying from his lips. This is a civil dispute. You have no right to detain me. I am not detaining you, Mr. Thorne, Croft said, rising from his chair for the first time. He was a truly imposing figure. I am a private citizen in a private room. I am merely having my security staff prevent you from committing the additional crime of fleeing the scene until the New York Police Department arrives. Evelyn, he said to his lawyer, please make the call. Attempted grand larceny, wire fraud, start there. Thorne's eyes went wide with pure, unadulterated terror. Jean-Pierre Dubois, who had been plastered against the wall like terrified wallpaper, looked as if he might actually faint. He was witnessing an extinction-level event in his dining room. But Julian Croft wasn't finished. His lawyer was already on her phone, but her face had suddenly gone pale for a different reason. Julian, she said, her voice strained. Wait, there's more. What is it? The contract, she said, her fingers frantically scrolling through the document on her tablet. I was just reviewing the final appendices. The boilerplate. My God, I missed it. It's diabolical. Croft turned to her. Explain. Page 38. Subsection C, Evelyn said, her voice shaking with a mixture of fury and professional shame. It's a conditional clause. It states that, upon the successful authentication and purchase of Nevada Sunfall, as the final piece in the catalog raisonné, the seller, Thorne's holding company, is granted the exclusive right of first refusal and primary partnership on all future licensing and reproductions of the entire Silas Croft estate. The room went cold. He wasn't selling you a painting for $50 million, Evelyn stammered, looking up from the tablet, her face aghast. He was using $50 million of your own money to buy a controlling interest in your family's entire artistic legacy. The painting was the Trojan horse. He would have bled the estate dry for generations. It wasn't about $50 million. It was about $1 billion, maybe more. The scam was breathtaking in its audacity. They hadn't just forged a painting. They had forged a key that would have unlocked and looted the Croft family vault. Julian Croft stood motionless for a long moment, absorbing the full scale of the betrayal. He had come here tonight to reclaim his grandfather's memory. He had come terrifyingly close to signing it away forever. He slowly turned his head. His gaze passed over the bleeding, pathetic figure of Marcus Thorne, over the broken academic Dr. Finch. He looked at the magnificent, fraudulent painting on the easel. Then his eyes landed on Maya. She was still standing there, holding the small light pen, her heart hammering against her ribs with the aftershock of the confrontation. He looked at her, then back at the lie she had exposed, then back to her again. Miss Linwood, he said, his voice quiet, stripped of all artifice. Who in God's name are you? The arrival of the NYPD's major case squad was a model of uptown discretion. No sirens, no uniformed officers, just two quiet, observant detectives in well-worn suits who were escorted up in a private elevator. Marcus Thorne and a completely silent Dr. Finch were being held in an adjacent conference room, their loud protestations and meek mumblings effectively neutralized by Croft's security team. Jean-Pierre Dubois had been dismissed with a look from Croft that could freeze alcohol, and a quiet word from Evelyn about the legal necessity of the hotel's absolute silence. It was just Maya, Julian Croft, his lawyer Evelyn, and a deeply chagrined Mr. Garrett. The adrenaline that had coursed through Maya's veins was draining away, leaving a profound, bone-deep tremor in its wake. She was still technically the waitress. Her training kicked in, a desperate search for normalcy, and her hands moved to clear the used water glasses from the table. Miss Linwood, Croft said gently, please don't. Maya froze, her hand hovering over a glass. Sit, he said, gesturing to the plush chair Marcus Thorne had so recently vacated. It felt wrong, a transgression of the natural order. Sir, I can't. I'm on duty. Your duties here are concluded, Croft said. It was not a dismissal, but a statement of fact. You are now my guest. Please sit down. Slowly, awkwardly, Maya slid into the chair. It was like sinking into a cloud of expensive leather. The obsidian table was cool against her trembling hands. Croft poured 2 glasses of Voss water himself, the clinking of the ice the only sound in the room. He pushed one towards her. Drink. Maya drank. The cold water was a shock to her system, grounding her. Now, Croft said, leaning forward, his pale eyes intense and searching. Again. Who are you? Maya looked at the table, at the $50 million contract that would never be signed. She looked at Mr. Garrett, who was watching her with an expression of profound professional respect and personal shame. The time for hiding, she realized, was over. My name is Maya Linwood. My grandfather was Daniel Linwood. Mr. Garrett's head shot up. Daniel Linwood, the painter? I knew his work. A brilliant technician. He and your grandfather, Mr. Croft, they were part of the same circle in the early days. Before my grandfather became Silas Croft, Julian finished, his voice flat, and yours remained Daniel Linwood. He never resented it, Maya said quickly, a fierce defense of the man who raised her. He respected it. He said your grandfather had a fire he couldn't control, and my grandfather's fire was one he could. He chose a different life, a quieter one. He taught you then, Croft stated. It wasn't a question. It explained everything. The fluent Italian, the encyclopedic knowledge of technique, the eye that saw the truth hidden behind a veneer of perfect lies. I grew up in his studio, Maya said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke of him. It was my playground and my classroom. I was stretching his canvases before I could properly write my own name. He taught me how to see, really see, the way light hits a surface, the way pigments interact, the way time itself becomes an artist, painting everything with decay and life. She faltered for a moment. He's sick now. A memory care facility. It's expensive. I had to defer my studies at the institute. This job was a way to survive, Croft finished for her. He looked at her, at the cheap but immaculate uniform, at the capable hands that knew the difference between real and artificial aging. He saw the scholar hidden within the servant. You wanted to be invisible. It was easier, she whispered. Being his granddaughter, carrying that name, it felt heavy. Being nobody was a relief. Anonymity, Croft murmured, a strange, bitter smile touching his lips, is a luxury I have never known, and a burden for someone like you, who was born to see. He was quiet for a long moment, the scale of what had happened settling around them. Then his expression hardened, shifting from the personal to the strategic. He looked at his lawyer. Evelyn, this was too slick, and yet too clumsy. Maya looked up. What do you mean? The sand, Croft said, his eyes fixed on Maya. The wet-on-wet technique. Those are mistakes a scholar would catch. Mistakes you would catch. But they are subtle. The contract, however, was not. It was an audacious, high-stakes legal gambit. The two sides of the scam feel different. The art forgery was meticulous. The legal trap was brutalist. Evelyn's eyes lit up with a grim understanding. You're right. Thorne is a peacock, a brilliant salesman, but he doesn't have the mind for a legal play this complex. And Finch is an academic, a purist corrupted by greed. He wouldn't have come up with this contract. They were tools. They were the front men. A cold dread, different from the fear of being fired, settled in the pit of Maya's stomach. So someone else was behind them. Someone who wrote that contract? Someone who wanted more than just money, Croft said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. Someone who wanted control of the Croft legacy, the brand, the copyright. Someone who wanted to turn my grandfather's soul into a factory for printing posters and coffee mugs. This wasn't just about theft. It was about annihilation. The silence in the room was no longer about shock. It was about the chilling realization of a much larger, more sinister game. They had caught the foot soldiers, but the general was still out there, hidden in the shadows, his plan only temporarily thwarted. Julian Croft stood and walked to the vast floor-to-ceiling window, looking down at the rain-slick streets of Manhattan. The city lights glittered below, a sprawling web of power and ambition. He had spent his life surrounded by sharks, but he had never imagined one would come dressed in the skin of his own family's history. He had almost willingly opened the gates. He turned back to the room. He looked at the server's apron Maya had left folded on a console. He looked at the brilliant, grieving, fiercely intelligent young woman who had just saved him from his own blind spot. "Miss Linwood," he said, his voice resonating with a new, unshakable purpose. "Your days of being nobody are over." The weeks that followed were a blur of quiet, intense activity. Maya gave her statement to the detectives in a sterile conference room in a downtown skyscraper. Her words recorded and transcribed, forming the core of the case against Thorne and Finch. True to his word, Julian Croft's legal team handled everything. They also handled her grandfather's medical bills, present and future. It wasn't presented as charity, but as a formal consultancy fee, detailed in a contract that Evelyn herself had drafted, a gesture of professional respect that meant more to Maya than any simple gift. She quit her job at the Apex. Mr. Dubois accepted her resignation with a single, terrified nod. She spent her days back where she belonged, in the quiet, sunlit room of the care facility, sitting with her grandfather. He had good days and bad. On the good days, she'd bring him books on art, and he'd trace the lines of a Rembrandt with a trembling finger, a flicker of the old master still alive in his eyes. On the bad days, he didn't know her name, but he seemed calmed by her presence, by the familiar smell of linseed oil she sometimes wore, dabbed on her wrists like perfume. About a month after the incident, she received a simple, formal invitation. Not a phone call, not an email, but a thick, cream-colored card delivered by courier. "Mr. Julian Croft requests the pleasure of your company for a private viewing at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Tuesday 10 a.m. The museum was closed to the public on Tuesdays. When Maya arrived, a guard was waiting, and he escorted her through the vast, echoing, empty halls. The silence was reverent. In the abstract expressionist wing, Julian Croft was standing alone in front of a monumental Silas Croft, a canvas of raging blues and blacks called Oceanic Rage. He wasn't looking at it with the eye of a collector, but with the complicated pain of a son and grandson. "He painted this the week after his father's funeral," Croft said without turning. "The official story is it's about the power of the sea off Montauk. It's not. It's about grief, a grief so large he had to invent a new way to paint it." He finally turned to her. "Thank you for coming." "Thank you for the invitation," Maya said softly. They walked for an hour, through empty galleries of impressionists and old masters. He didn't talk about Thorne or the fraud. He asked about her grandfather. He asked about her studies, about her theories on pigment degradation in Rothko's later works. He listened, truly listened, with an intensity that was both intimidating and deeply flattering. He was vetting her, she realized, but not for a job. He was vetting her for her soul. Finally, they stood in the atrium. "Thorne and Finch have implicated their backer," he said, his tone shifting back to business. "A rival tech conglomerate run by a man named Elias Vance. My father outmaneuvered him on a patent deal 30 years ago. It seems Vance holds a grudge. He saw a way to not just make money, but to humiliate my family by seizing and corrupting its most prized legacy." "What will happen to him?" Maya asked. "Nothing," Croft said with a chilling finality. "Publicly, Vance is too powerful, too insulated, but he will be dealt with. The art world, however, is a different matter. It's still rife with people like Thorne. Brilliant forgeries, corrupt experts, and buyers who are too eager, too proud, or too ignorant to see the truth." He stopped and faced her directly. "I am establishing a new foundation, the Silas Croft Institute for Artistic Integrity. Its mission will be twofold. First, to create an open-source database of forensic data on major 20th century artists to make forgery more difficult. And second, to serve as a private consultancy, an independent authenticator for major acquisitions. We will hunt the lies, Miss Linwood. We will drag them into the light." Maya's heart began to beat faster. She knew what was coming. "I need a director for this institute," Croft said. "I don't need another academic like Finch, who can be blinded by prestige. I don't need a businessman who only sees a balance sheet. I need someone who sees the truth. Someone with Daniel Linwood's knowledge in their hands and his honesty in their blood. Someone who is not afraid to speak when everyone else in the room is silent." He looked at her, his pale blue eyes clear and direct. "I know you wanted to be invisible. I am offering you a chance to be seen. To finish your studies. The Institute will fund them, of course. To build a legacy that honors your grandfather, not by hiding from his world, but by protecting it. He offered a small, rare smile. The salary will be more than adequate. Your research budget will be, for all intents and purposes, unlimited. You will answer only to me. He was offering her a life she had thought was lost forever. A purpose. You will never have to serve another glass of water again, Maya, he said, unless you choose to. She thought of her grandfather. She thought of the smell of his studio, the feel of a prime canvas, the sacred duty to the truth that he had instilled in her. She was done with hiding. She met his gaze, not as a waitress, not as a victim, but as a colleague. She held out her hand. When do we start? 1 year later, the main laboratory of the Croft Institute, located in a discreetly renovated warehouse in Chelsea, was a cathedral of quiet science. North-facing windows bathed the room in a cool, consistent light. High-resolution scanners hummed softly next to gas chromatographs and X-ray fluorescence machines. A woman stood before a large screen, pointing to a magnified image of a single brushstroke. She was dressed in a simple but elegant dark pantsuit, her hair cut in a practical, stylish bob. Her voice was calm, confident, and authoritative as she addressed a small group of graduate fellows from the IFA. The forger's error here wasn't chemical, Director Linwood explained, her honey-colored eyes sharp and focused. It was psychological. He was trying so hard to replicate the look of a de Kooning that he forgot to replicate the energy. De Kooning's strokes were fast, often violent. The paint ridges are high and sharp because the brush was moving at speed. This stroke, she zoomed in on the image, is slow, cautious. The ridges are rounded. The artist was copying a shape, not performing an action. He was timid. De Kooning was never ever timid. A young fellow raised his hand. Director Linwood, the Nevada Sunfall forgery. Is it true it's now the centerpiece of the FBI's art crime training program? Maya smiled. It is. It's the most expensive and valuable teaching tool they have. A $50 million lesson in the importance of looking beyond the paperwork. After the session, Maya walked back to her office. Mr. Garrett, whom Croft had assigned to be her chief administrator, met her at the door. Maya, the auction house in London called. The disputed bacon triptych. They're ready to ship it to us for analysis. Excellent, Henry, she said. Let them know we're ready. Her office was large and minimalist, dominated by a single, small painting on the wall. It wasn't a priceless masterpiece. It was a simple, lovely landscape by Daniel Linwood. Sitting in one of the chairs in front of her desk, sipping a cup of black coffee, was Julian Croft. Julian, she said, surprised, I didn't know you were coming in. I was in the neighborhood, he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners. I heard the end of your lecture. Copying a shape, not performing an action. Your grandfather's words. They are the heart of everything we do here, Maya said, gesturing to a photo of Daniel on her desk. As they should be, Croft said. He stood holding a sleek, encrypted tablet. I have a new challenge for you, a potential client, a private collector in Kyoto. He claims to have found a lost Rothko from his dark period. He says it was a gift to a Japanese philosopher in the 60s. Maya's eyes lit up with the thrill of the hunt. Rothko's lost Kyoto sketch? Most experts believe that's a myth. So they say, Croft said, handing her the tablet. The price is considerable. The seller is cautious. He will only allow one person to view it. He wants a face-to-face authentication. No entourage. Maya took the tablet, her fingers already flying across the screen, pulling up historical data, pigment analysis from other Rothkos of that period, and archival weather reports from Kyoto in the 1960s. You fly out tomorrow morning, Croft said. My jet is at your disposal. You'll go in as an independent consultant. Anonymous, quiet, invisible. Maya looked up from the tablet, a slow, confident smile spreading across her face. Invisible, sir. The most effective way to be seen, Croft replied, mirroring her smile. Go and find the truth, Maya. I will, Julian, she said, her mind already halfway across the world, dissecting layers of paint and history. She was Maya Linwood, the director. She was Daniel Linwood's granddaughter. She was a scholar, a protector, a hunter of beautiful lies. She was no longer a ghost in someone else's story. She was the one holding the light,